What if, what if the history you learned in school about Kenya's independence was actually, a carefully crafted script?
Like a script written way before the first ballot was even cast.
Right. Welcome to the Kenya Wantam No Tam Movement podcast.
KWM for short.
Exactly. Usually when we explore a nation's founding, there is this expectation of a clean, heroic narrative.
Oh, for sure. The
Right.
classic good versus evil story.
Yeah, you have the oppressors, you have the brave freedom fighters who rise up, they win the day, the flag goes up, and the country belongs to the people.
It is a story we all love to hear. It gives us a sense of comfort.
It really does. But then, you step into the actual historical records, the economic data, the lived reality of everyday people, and suddenly that beautiful painting starts looking, well, very different.
It looks a lot more complicated, a lot less fair.
Today, our mission for this deep dive is to take a stack of eye-opening source material, specifically this incredibly detailed document titled The Lie We Were Sold at Independence.
It is a heavy title, but a necessary one.
Right. And we want to extract the most crucial insights tailored just for you, our listener. The document tackles some really difficult historical truths.
But the ultimate goal is highly positive, which is important to remember.
Yes, absolutely. It lays out a roadmap for genuine, citizen-led change. And we are going to explore exactly how the author suggests getting there.
That framing is essential. The document doesn't just look back at history just to point fingers or assign blame.
No, it looks back to dissect the machinery of the present.
Exactly. Because understanding the vast gap between Kenya's wealthy elite and its struggling citizens today, well, it requires looking at a system engineered over 60 years ago.
A system that just keeps reproducing itself every 5 years.
Like clockwork. And if you don't understand the original blueprint of that machinery, you can't possibly understand how to dismantle it.
Which brings me back to that provocative thought I dropped at the very beginning. The source document begins by just completely dismantling the foundational myth of Kenya's independence.
Right, the myth we all grew up with.
We all know the romanticized image. Jomo Kenyatta is released from Community prison in 1961. The crowds go absolutely wild.
The world sees this suffering father of a nation who made the British Empire tremble.
But the source material throws a massive wrench into this narrative. It argues he wasn't feared by the British at all by that point.
Not even a little bit. The document claims he was managed, groomed even.
Okay, let's unpack this because that is a huge claim. What exactly does a managed transition look like in a historical context?
Well, to understand the mechanics of a managed transition, we have to look at what the departing power actually wanted.
Right, the British.
Yes, there is a profound difference between a government imprisoning a man because he terrifies them and holding a man because, well, it makes him a more useful, controlled asset.
Ah, I see.
The document highlights this glaring contrast that is almost always left out of the celebratory history books.
We're talking about the reality of detention during the state of emergency in the 1950s, right?
Exactly. The source is incredibly specific about this contrast. On one hand, you have actual Mau combatants being hunted down in the Aberdare forests.
Hunted down, tortured in those notorious pipeline camps, and hanged by the hundreds.
But Kenyatta's experience, according to the records cited in the text, was vastly different, particularly during his time in Lodwar and Maralal.
Right, the document really hones in on Maralal.
Yeah, you're hitting on the exact paradox the author highlights. Maralal was not some dark subterranean torture facility.
What was it then?
Well, the historical records show he was in a place where he could read extensively, write letters, receive specific political visitors.
Wait, I read he even grew his own vegetables there.
Yes, he had a vegetable garden. The colonial administration was deliberately preserving him.
But why? If they were fighting a brutal war against the Mau Mau, why preserve him?
Because if you are a departing colonial power like the British, your primary concern is no longer keeping the Union Jack flying over Nairobi.
Your primary concern is the money.
Precisely. It's about protecting capital. You want to ensure that the massive wealth accumulated by British settlers, the old profit networks, they continue operating seamlessly.
Even after independence.
Right. And you absolutely cannot achieve that with radical freedom fighters who want to tear the entire system down and redistribute the stolen land.
So you need a figurehead.
You need someone who has the cultural cachet of a revolutionary, but the pragmatic willingness to protect the status quo. Someone acceptable to the crown.
Wow. It's like a departing CEO handing the keys over to a hand-picked successor just to ensure the old company policies stay exactly the same.
Just with a new logo on the letterhead? That is the perfect analogy.
But here is the question for you, as someone trying to make sense of this. How did a population that was so starved for a hero swallow this?
A population that had endured the horrors of the emergency period, no less.
Exactly. How did they accept this narrative so completely?
They accepted it because a population experiencing immense generational trauma is just desperate for a focal point of hope.
They needed a messiah.
And the British colonial intelligence understood this psychological reality perfectly. They allowed Kenyatta's mystique to grow while he was in detention.
So by keeping him removed from the chaotic factional politics of the late 1950s, he emerged as this unifying figure.
Exactly. But while the public saw a messiah, the British saw a manager.
And that leads us straight into the Lancaster House Conferences of 1960 and 1962.
Oh, yes. The room where it happened.
According to the source, these conferences are where the actual blueprint for the nation was drawn up.
And the document notes that these negotiations happened largely without the radical voices of the revolution in the room.
They were just shut out. You have British officials and a highly select group of acceptable, educated African politicians sitting in ornate rooms in London.
Deciding the fate of an agricultural nation thousands of miles away.
And the most contentious issue on the table was the land question.
Right, because millions of Kenyans had been violently dispossessed of their ancestral lands by British settlers.
Let's create the White Highlands.
Exactly. The central promise of the liberation struggle was the return of that stolen land.
But the Lancaster House Agreement settled this through a policy framework. The phrase was willing buyer, willing seller.
Willing buyer, willing seller. Let's really think about that phrase.
I have to pause here because I want to make sure you, the listener, grasp the sheer audacity of this mechanism.
Quite something when you break it down.
On the surface, willing buyer, willing seller sounds perfectly fair. It sounds like basic free market economics.
Sure, if you ignore the history.
Right. But when you apply it to land that was acquired through colonial violence, wait, does that mean the people who had their land violently taken from them were legally required to buy it back?
From the very people who stole it, yes. That is exactly the mechanism.
That is just, it's unbelievable.
The document breaks down how devastating this was. The departing British settlers were not going to simply hand the titles back. They demanded compensation at full market value.
So the new Kenyan government had to take on massive loans.
Massive loans from the World Bank and the British government just to buy out the settlers.
Let me get this straight. The newly independent nation plunged itself into immediate sovereign debt to pay off the colonizers for the land they had originally stolen.
Yes, that is the reality. And the burden of that debt was then passed on to the African citizens who wanted to settle on that land.
They had to take out individual loans to buy small parcels of their own reclaimed farms.
The document emphasizes that Jomo Kenyatta did not fight this arrangement when he transitioned into power. He endorsed it.
He actually endorsed it.
He did. The declassified records from the British National Archives, which the text references, they show communications between British intelligence and Kenyan political actors confirming this was the goal all along.
A managed handover to keep the economic engine humming under a new flag.
It is a total paradigm shift. The document explicitly says there is a term for a man placed into power by a departing administration, handed the levels of an extractive state, and asked to keep the old profit networks going.
And that term is not freedom fighter.
No. The author argues he was a colonial candidate, the most important beneficiary of a rigged system.
And to fully grasp the weight of that benefit, we have to look at the other side of the ledger.
Right. Who pays the price for this arrangement?
Exactly. If this colonial candidate is being elevated and protected, who is being actively suppressed?
The document argues that this managed transition required the deliberate, systematic erasure of the true freedom fighters.
So if the foundation of this wealth was laid by accommodating the colonizers, what happened to the people who actually bled for the land?
The contrast the document draws here is just heartbreaking.
In the dense forests of Mount Kenya and the Aberdares, the fighters were driven by clear promises.
Freedom from British rule, the unconditional return of stolen land.
An economy serving Africans, and dignity for those who sacrificed everything. But the source outlines what was actually delivered.
And this wasn't the British doing this, which is the hardest part to swallow.
It was the newly formed independent Kenyatta government that declared the Mau Mau a criminal organization.
This brings us to a crucial question of political intent. The source details the tragic fate of specific individuals to highlight the scale of this betrayal.
Right, like the Dan Kimathi.
Yes, the legendary leader of the uprising. He was hanged by the British on February 18, 1957.
But the betrayal happened years later.
By the time Kenyatta took office and the flag was raised, Kimathi's surviving comrades weren't invited to the podium.
They weren't given medals.
They certainly weren't given land. They were scattered, marginalized, denied state pensions.
And the document says in some documented cases, they were even imprisoned again or assassinated by the new state apparatus.
It was a brutal silencing.
The document specifically mentions Field Marshal Muthoni wa Kirima. She was one of the highest-ranking and last surviving Mao generals.
A true hero of the struggle.
The text notes she spent decades filing petitions for recognition and compensation.
Petitions that were just entirely ignored by successive governments.
Women who smuggled weapons under their skirts, who passed vital intelligence through heavily guarded colonial checkpoints, who watched their own children die of starvation in the forests.
And they got absolutely nothing.
I want to represent the listener here and push back on the author's premise just a bit.
Sure, let's hear it.
Is it possible that the fledgling government was just broke? Like, genuinely couldn't afford a massive compensation program for thousands of guerrilla fighters?
It is a very common historical defense. People bring it up all the time.
Because running a new country is expensive.
It is. But the source meticulously dismantles that lack of funds argument.
How so?
The erasure of the Mau Mau wasn't a tragic administrative oversight or a budgeting shortfall. It was a calculated, absolute political necessity.
Why was it necessary?
Think about the mechanics of the willing buyer, willing seller agreement we just discussed.
Okay, the land buyback program.
Right. Acknowledging the fighters and honoring their specific sacrifices would have inherently required honoring the promise of unconditional land redistribution.
Ah, I see. Because the fighters knew exactly which ridges and valleys belonged to their clans?
Exactly. They knew exactly which British settlers had forcibly removed them.
So they were basically eyewitnesses to the original theft.
Precisely. The fighters had the most legitimate grievances, the physical scars of the war, and the most detailed institutional memory of the theft.
Therefore, they were the single biggest threat to the new elite.
The same elite who were quietly busy acquiring that very same land for themselves.
Wow. The document notes that the official government slogan at the time was Harambee, focusing on moving forward and forgetting the past.
But the author argues that moving forward was just polite, state-sanctioned code for forcing the people with the most legitimate claims into total silence.
And while the fighters were being silenced in the villages, a billionaire empire was being born in the capital.
The wealth accumulation is staggering.
The source traces the massive, almost incomprehensible wealth accumulation of the new ruling elite, specifically focusing on the Kenyatta family.
The numbers are hard to wrap your head around.
The text states that by the time Jomo Kenyatta died in 1978, his family controlled hundreds of thousands of acres across multiple counties.
Prime farms in the Rift Valley.
Farms that used to belong to British settlers were seamlessly passed to his family and a tight circle of political associates.
And the mechanism the document describes for how this happened is the Settlement Fund Trustee Scheme.
The SFT.
Yeah.
I want to spend some time here. How exactly did this scheme work?
Well, on paper, the Settlement Fund Trustee was a noble initiative.
It sounds good, right? A fund to settle people.
Right. It was ostensibly created and funded by those international loans we talked about to help landless Africans, former squatters, and poor farmers purchase and settle on the subdivided European farms.
You're supposed to be the great equalizer.
But the document cites extensive research showing how the mechanism was manipulated from the inside.
So how do you manipulate a massive national land registry program?
Through the opacity of bureaucracy. The allocation processes were completely hidden from the public.
So nobody knew who was getting what.
Exactly. While poor farmers were dealing with endless red tape trying to secure just a 5-acre plot, the most fertile, expansive, prime parcels of land were being channeled directly to the politically connected.
How did they do it without raising red flags?
Elites would use proxy names, leverage insider knowledge of which farms were being vacated, and utilize state resources to secure the titles.
All without having to go through the rigorous loan repayment processes demanded of the poor.
It was a fast track to wealth for a very select few.
Let me paint this picture for you, the listener. While the actual sons and daughters of the Mau Mau fighters were quite literally standing in lines outside government offices,
Holding those faded photographs of their dead parents.
trying to file compensation claims, the family of the president and his ministers were inside those very same offices.
Registering title deeds on the massive tracts of land those fighters bled to liberate.
That is a staggering realization.
And the document points out this wasn't just a one-generation land grab.
No, it traces the compounding of this wealth right through to the modern era, to the presidency of Uhuru Kenyatta.
Wealth of that magnitude, particularly land wealth, provides ultimate leverage.
It's the foundation of everything else.
Exactly. The document lists the strategic expansion of this initial capital into every major sector of the modern Kenyan economy.
We're looking at banking, large-scale agriculture, hospitality, real estate.
The text mentions major corporate entities like Brookside Dairy, Heritage Hotels, and significant controlling stakes in banking institutions like the Commercial Bank of Africa.
The author paints a picture of an elite class that has spent over 60 years living entirely inside a political and economic system that it personally designed.
They've absolutely zero structural incentive to dismantle it, because the system is performing exactly as intended.
So if the foundation of this immense wealth was laid in the 1960s through managed transitions and land manipulation, how do the architects of this system protect it today?
That is the big question.
Because on paper, Kenya is a vibrant multi-party democracy. We have energetic campaigns, we have millions of voters turning out, we have televised debates.
It looks very democratic from the outside.
But the source argues that modern Kenyan politics is basically an elaborate theater. The author uses a striking concept, calling the entire democratic apparatus a beautiful cage.
A beautiful cage. The document is really dissecting the illusion of choice here.
It compares Kenya's endless cycling through different political parties to a patient cycling through different brands of painkillers for a severely broken bone.
The pain might be temporarily masked by the excitement of a new campaign.
But the actual structural injury goes completely untreated, and the body politic just learns to function in a perpetually damaged state.
Right. I was reading the timeline of political parties the author laid out, and honestly, for a listener trying to keep track, it's dizzying.
The alphabet soup of acronyms is intense.
Help me understand what actually happens during these transitions. We start with KANU, the Kenya African National Union.
Which ruled the country as essentially a one-party state for nearly 40 years.
Then KANU finally falls, and in 2002, we get NARS.
Yes, the National Rainbow Coalition, or NARS. The document describes 2002 as a moment of unprecedented national euphoria.
You had Kenyans literally dancing in the streets, right?
Dancing in the streets, arresting corrupt policemen themselves. You had historically opposed figures like Raila Odinga and Mwai Kibaki embracing on stage.
An entire generation genuinely believed the country had finally turned a corner and defeated the elite capture of the KANU era.
But the document says that within 2 years, the illusion shattered.
It points specifically to the Anglo-leasing scandal.
For a listener who might just know that name as a buzzword for corruption, what exactly was the Anglo-leasing scandal, and why does the author use it as the ultimate proof that the system hadn't changed?
Well, Anglo-leasing is the perfect case study of how the machinery survives a change in management.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The scandal involved government contracts for high-tech services. Things like a forensic science laboratory for the police and tamper-proof passports.
Stuff a modern state needs.
Exactly. These contracts, worth billions of shillings, were awarded to a company called Anglo Leasing and Finance Company.
Let me guess, they were the lowest bidder with the best technology.
Quite the opposite, actually. Investigative journalists and whistleblowers discovered that Anglo Leasing was a phantom company.
A phantom company, like it didn't exist.
It was a web of shell corporations registered in Europe with absolutely no operational capacity.
So what was the government paying for?
Nothing. The government was paying massive promissory notes to empty offices.
Oh, wow.
Now, here is the critical part the document highlights. These fraudulent contracts were actually initiated during the old KANU regime.
Okay, so the old corrupt guys started the scam. Why does this implicate the new reformist NRC government?
Because when the new NRC officials discovered the scam, they didn't cancel the contracts and prosecute the architects.
Wait, they let it keep going.
They allowed the payments to continue, and in some cases, they authorized new ones.
Why on earth would they do that?
Because the new ruling coalition quickly realized they needed massive amounts of unregulated cash to fund their own upcoming political campaigns.
To maintain the loyalty of their new political allies.
Exactly. The reformers became the new beneficiaries. The faces changed, but the extraction mechanism did not.
That is incredibly revealing. And that sets off the cycle the document tracks over the next 2 decades.
We go from NRC to ODM, the Orange Democratic Movement.
Then to the Jubilee Alliance, then NASA, then Azimio, then UDA. the United Democratic Alliance.
Each new acronym arrives with the exact same passionate promise to finally fix what the previous acronym failed to fix.
And millions of sincere, rational Kenyan voters participate in this cycle because the system offers them absolutely no meaningful alternative.
As the text brilliantly points out, you cannot check a box for dismantle the elite extraction system on a ballot paper.
Your only choices on Election Day are candidates who have already been selected, vetted, funded, and positioned by the system itself.
The author explicitly states that political parties in Kenya are not ideological organizations in the way you might understand them in other democracies.
Right. They aren't debating the nuances of tax policy or foreign relations.
The document calls them hiring agencies for positions of state access.
You don't join a party for its vision of the future. You join it because it is the most viable vehicle to compete for access to state resources.
And we have to look at the staggering financial cost of maintaining this theater.
The document breaks down the economics of a Kenyan election to show why ordinary citizens are priced out of leadership.
It cites the 2017 general election, noting that the official cost was over 40 billion Kenyan shillings.
40 billion shillings.
Yeah.
Just to facilitate the voting process.
Yes. That makes it one of the most expensive elections per voter anywhere on Earth.
And what does that 40 billion actually cover?
That represents the official taxpayer money, donor funds, and borrowed cash required for the Electoral Commission, the printing of millions of complex ballots, and the massive security apparatus deployed.
Because every election inherently generates tension and disputes.
Exactly. But the document stresses that this 40 billion is just the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't even touch the informal campaign economy.
The document mentions the informal economy, but let's paint a vivid picture for the listener of what that actually looks and feels like on the ground.
We aren't just talking about buying TV commercials, are we?
Not at all. The informal campaign economy is an ecosystem of massive, unregulated cash distribution.
It involves hiring thousands of boda riders, the motorcycle taxi drivers, to form massive convoys just to create the visual illusion of popularity.
It involves funding local youth groups, essentially utilizing them as private security or intimidation squads against rivals.
It means handing out 50 or 100 shilling notes to thousands of people attending rallies.
And on Election Day, it means having the millions of shillings in cash required to pay off your party agents at every single tallying center across the country.
Just to ensure your votes aren't stolen.
So the barrier to entry is astronomically high. You cannot run a grassroots, idea-based campaign because you are competing against billionaires funding a cash-based logistical army.
The document argues that this massive financial ecosystem is built entirely to produce an outcome where the winner can then recoup their massive investment.
How do they recoup it?
Through the very mechanisms we discussed. Inflated state contracts like Anglo-leasing, prime land allocations, and direct budget manipulation once they control the treasury.
Exactly. It is an investment strategy, not a public service calling.
But wait, I have to bring up the 2010 Constitution, because globally, the Kenyan Constitution of 2010 is celebrated as this massive, transformative democratic milestone.
It really is seen as a gold standard.
It brought in a highly progressive Bill of Rights, it created independent commissions, and most importantly, it brought devolution, shifting power away from the presidency.
Surely, the author acknowledges that changed the game.
The author acknowledges that on paper, the 2010 Constitution is a legal masterpiece. But this is exactly where the concept of the beautiful cage comes into play.
Explain that analogy for us.
The document describes the Constitution like installing a multi-million shilling state-of-the-art security system in a national bank, but leaving the master access codes in the hands of the bank robbers.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The technology is perfect, but the human element renders it useless.
A constitution is only as strong as the political culture willing to enforce its provisions. The source argues that legal reform fundamentally fails when the laws are interpreted, funded, and enforced by the very people the laws are supposed to hold accountable.
Let's look at devolution, the crown jewel of the 2010 Constitution.
The idea was to take power and money away from the centralized elite in Nairobi and give it to local communities.
So instead of one powerful president, we got 47 county governors.
But the document suggests this didn't cure the disease, it just mutated it.
Did devolution just take the corruption at the national level and copy-paste it 47 times?
That is precisely the author's argument. The elite political actors ultimately agreed to pass the 2010 Constitution because they correctly calculated they could adapt and live very comfortably within its new structures.
Devolution legally mandated that billions of shillings be sent down to the 47 counties.
But the local county assemblies and the new governors simply replicated the national patronage networks.
They created their own inflated supply contracts, their own ghost workers on the county payroll, and their own local kickback schemes.
What about the independent commissions? They were supposed to be the referees keeping everyone honest.
They were systematically neutralized. The Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, the IEBC, was supposed to guarantee credible, unquestionable elections.
Instead, it became the site of bitter, highly partisan disputes, with its commissioners frequently subjected to immense political pressure, bribery, or intimidation.
An anti-corruption commission was empowered, yet Kenya's global corruption ranking barely twitched.
The document's thesis is clear. You cannot constitutionalize your way out of an extractive power structure when the primary beneficiaries of that structure are the ones appointing the judges and allocating the budgets.
It means the system is virtually bulletproof against its own internal rules. Now, before we transition from this high-level political and historical theory to the devastating everyday reality for the citizens who actually build and sustain this country, I want to take a brief moment to connect directly with you, our listener.
We are unpacking a history of systemic theft, but as we established at the beginning, the ultimate goal of the source material we are diving into is entirely about empowerment and providing a roadmap.
Visit www.wantumnotum.com and create your account. Get free ebooks and enjoy KWM Podcast 24/7. Help change Kenya. You got the power. Together, we can create the change we all have wanted for the last 60 years. Kenya belongs to all of us, not just to the looting elites.
The transition from the political theater of Nairobi to the lived reality of the citizens across the country is where the true human cost of this system becomes visible.
The document highlights the stark, unforgiving statistics that 60 years of this managed system have produced.
We're looking at a 36% poverty rate, a staggering 72% youth unemployment rate.
Over 8 million Kenyans facing chronic food insecurity in a nation that is geographically blessed with more than enough fertile agricultural land to feed its entire population and export the surplus.
Those numbers are difficult to process. Over a third of the entire country living below the poverty line.
Nearly 3/4 of the youth, the most energetic, educated demographic, either completely unemployed or severely underpaid in the informal sector.
The source makes a profound foundational statement here. Kenya is not a poor country. It is a country where poverty is intentionally concentrated among the people who do the actual work, while wealth is aggressively concentrated among the people who control the political machinery.
Let's look at the people doing the actual work. The document anchors its argument by focusing on 3 specific critical pillars of the nation: the farmer, the teacher, and the doctor.
Let's start with the agricultural base, the farmer. The document uses the tea farmers in the lush hills of Kericho as its primary case study.
These are the men and women who wake up before dawn to plant, prune, and pluck tea leaves. It is back-breaking, highly skilled labor.
That tea is then processed, sent to the Mombasa auction house, and exported globally to markets in London, Dubai, and Karachi.
These farmers single-handedly earn Kenya hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign exchange every single year.
But the people with their hands actually in the dirt are financially trapped.
The document outlines how their wages haven't kept pace with basic everyday costs like fertilizer, transportation, or their children's school fees.
And the author points the finger directly at the structural design of the industry, specifically calling out the Kenya Tea Development Agency, the KTDA.
Now wait, the KTDA is supposed to be the body that protects smallholder farmers, right? How are they part of the extraction? Walk me through the life cycle of the theft here.
To understand the theft, you have to trace the leaf. When a farmer plucks a kilo of green leaf, they deliver it to a local buying center.
From there, it goes to a KTDA-managed factory for processing, and then to the international market.
The farmer doesn't get paid the international market rate directly. The KTDA collects the revenue and pays the farmer.
But the document notes that researchers have consistently documented the agency paying out significantly less than the true market value of the tea.
Where does the difference go?
It is absorbed by the bureaucracy. It goes to opaque management fees, highly questionable exchange rate conversions, and inflated logistical costs.
But most crucially, the document argues that the surplus value is funneled to politically connected middlemen, directors and brokers who have never stepped foot on a muddy farm in Kericho.
They sit in boardrooms in Nairobi and take a percentage of the sweat of the farmer. It is colonial-style extraction operating under a local bureaucratic mandate.
So we see how the system extracts from the agricultural base, the farmers in the rural areas. But what about the educated middle class?
You would naturally assume that public servants, the people employed directly by the state, fare better.
Yet the document points to the teachers next. It describes the almost rhythmic, predictable regularity of teacher strikes in Kenya.
Yes, the dynamic with the teachers perfectly illustrates the state's true priorities. Every few years, the unions demand better pay and smaller class sizes.
The Teachers Service Commission, the government body, engages in drawn-out negotiations, delays the process, and eventually offers a tiny fraction of what is actually needed to sustain a family.
And the government's standard, unwavering defense in the media is always the same. The country is simply broke.
But the source brilliantly calls out the glaring hypocrisy of that defense.
A government that can easily and instantly find billions of shillings to pay inflated consultancy fees for the standard gauge railway project or to constantly upgrade the luxury fleets of vehicles for the presidency and cabinet ministers.
That is not a broke government. The document specifically mentions the NGCDF. What is that, and how does it prove the government has money?
NGCDF stands for the National Government Constituencies Development Fund. It is a massive pool of taxpayer money allocated to members of parliament, ostensibly for local development projects.
That sounds like a good thing. Why is it problematic?
Because of how it's utilized. The document explains that MPs treat the NGCDF essentially as personal campaign war chests.
Instead of funding the hiring of thousands of needed teachers, MPs use the funds to build ornate stone gates for schools, paint them in their party colors, and slap their names on the plaques.
They fund highly visible, low-impact infrastructure projects that guarantee them visibility for the next election.
The author argues this proves the money exists. It is just being diverted from human capital to political capital.
The government is making a very specific, calculated choice. They are choosing to pay the people who move paper and secure votes, rather than the people who shape the minds of the next generation.
And the document applies this exact same logic, perhaps even more devastatingly, to the medical profession.
This part of the source material is deeply emotional. The author asks the reader to imagine dedicating nearly a decade of your life to grueling medical training.
You take the oath. You want to save lives. And the government places you as an intern in a county hospital that doesn't even have reliable running water, basic antibiotics, or functioning electricity in the surgical wards.
And the financial insult matches the physical conditions. The document details how the state pays young doctors a salary so insulting that they are physically forced to go moonlight at private clinics in the evenings.
Just to make enough money to pay their rent in Nairobi or Mombasa? The author uses a very powerful phrase here, calling this reality a slow punishment for the crime of caring about public service.
And the inevitable result of this punishment is a massive ongoing brain drain. Some of the brightest, most skilled physicians and specialists on the entire African continent are packing their bags and boarding planes to the UK, the US, Canada, and Australia.
But the document's analysis here is critical, and it really caught my attention. It states that this brain drain is not an accident, and it's not a failure of the system.
The author claims the system actually benefits from the doctors leaving. Help me understand that mechanism, because that is a very dark realization. Why on earth would a country want its highly trained doctors to leave?
To understand the why, you have to look at who profits from the alternative. If the public healthcare system is fully functional, well-staffed, and free or affordable, citizens will go there.
But if the public system is broken, understaffed, and dangerous, citizens who are desperate to save the lives of their loved ones will be forced to borrow money, sell their land, or empty their savings to access private healthcare.
Okay, and who owns the private healthcare sector?
The document points out that the expansive private healthcare infrastructure, the high-end hospitals, the lucrative medical insurance companies, and the pharmaceutical import businesses are largely owned, directly or through proxies, by the exact same elite class that controls the political machinery.
By intentionally starving the public hospitals of funds and driving the doctors away, the political elite ensure a captive, desperate market for their own private medical businesses.
The system works exactly as designed. So for the listener who relies on these public services, who sends their kids to public schools and takes their parents to public hospitals, the core realization is that the system isn't broken, it is functioning perfectly to serve someone else's bottom line.
Which brings us to the most crucial and frankly the most exciting part of this deep dive. Section 5. The Master Plan for Change.
We have spent significant time diagnosing the historical and economic disease. Now, what is the cure?
The source transitions from this heavy diagnosis into highly positive, empowering solutions. How do citizens actually fight back against a machine this entrenched?
The foundational first step, according to the document, is abandoning the political tactics that have demonstrably failed for 60 years.
The author argues that trying to work within the system, hoping for a kinder, more ethical candidate to emerge from the party primaries, or drafting a slightly better piece of anti-corruption legislation is entirely futile.
You cannot ask a machine that was historically designed for elite extraction to suddenly start producing equity. It requires dismantling the system from the outside.
And the author states that starts with seeing through the most effective psychological tool the elite have used to maintain their control: manufactured ethnic division.
Let's unpack this ethnic division, because it is the defining feature of Kenyan political discourse. We hear it relentlessly every single election cycle.
The media and the politicians obsess over the voting blocks: the Kikuyu, the Luo, the Kalenjin, the Luya, the Kamba.
But the document states that this intense focus on ethnic identity serves one primary overarching function. It prevents a poor farmer in Moranga and a poor farmer in Siaya from realizing they are being robbed by the exact same system.
The document is dissecting how identity politics is used as the ultimate smokescreen. Think about the mechanics of this distraction.
As long as the citizens are bitterly fighting each other over the ethnic identity of the person sitting in the presidency, they aren't organizing against the systemic act of robbery itself.
The author makes a brilliant observation about class solidarity at the top. The political elite, regardless of whether they are Kalenjin, Luo, or Kikuyu, share absolute unified class interest.
They send their children to the exact same elite overseas universities, they co-invest in the same luxury real estate developments, and they socialize in the same exclusive country clubs.
They don't let ethnicity stop them from making a profit together.
Exactly. The document posits that the moment everyday citizens recognize their shared economic oppression, the moment the underpaid teacher in Kisumu aligns with the underpaid teacher in Yeri, the political class will face a massive unified constituency that they have absolutely no historical experience managing.
The author outlines what a real overthrow of this system looks like, and importantly, it is not about violence. The document frames this as highly practical. It's about the strategic, organized withdrawal of participation.
The text lists 4 key strategies, and I want us to explore how each of them practically works. First, economic solidarity networks.
The document talks about farmers, urban traders, and workers organizing their own supply chains, cooperative banks, and mutual aid societies.
I see the vision here, but I want to represent the skeptical listener for a moment.
Here.
It's easy to write, stop fighting, and build a co-op in a manifesto. But how do these economic solidarity networks actually break the cycle of elite capture in a practical, day-to-day way?
You're asking for the practical mechanics, which is exactly what the author provides. This raises an important question about the economics of protest.
The current elite system relies entirely on extracting tiny amounts of wealth from millions of vulnerable people every single day through transaction fees, predatory lending apps, manipulated agricultural prices, and indirect taxes.
The Solidarity Network strategy is about starving that beast.
How so? Give me a concrete example.
If a community of market traders pools their capital and routes their daily savings into a community-owned cooperative credit union, rather than depositing it into a massive commercial bank owned by a political family, that is capital directly denied to the oppressor.
It means the interest paid on loans stays within the community rather than funding a politician's helicopter fuel.
If the Kericho tea farmers we discussed earlier organize a direct-to-market cooperative, bypassing the politically connected KTDA middlemen, they suddenly retain the full value of their labor.
The author's point is profound. Every single shilling spent, saved, or invested within a localized solidarity economy is a shilling starved from the national extraction machine. It shifts real economic power before a voter ever touches a ballot box.
That is incredibly empowering. It takes the fight out of the abstract realm of constitutional law and puts it right into your wallet and your community.
The second strategy the document outlines is radical information campaigns.
The author points out that today's citizens, especially the educated urban youth and the diaspora, have access to communication tools that previous generations fighting the system did not possess.
We're talking about social media, encrypted messaging, independent digital journalism, and crowdsourced legal networks.
The strategy is to use these tools to relentlessly name names, publish hidden data, and force public accountability on very specific contracts and land allocations.
The effectiveness of this strategy lies in understanding how the elite operate. They function best in the shadows.
They rely on complex, layered corporate structures, offshore accounts, and incredibly obscure, jargon-filled government gazettes to hide their theft.
Radical transparency is an asymmetric weapon. When a network of citizen journalists publishes exactly who owns the shell company that was awarded a billion-shilling road tender without a competitive bid, they strip away the anonymity that protects the political class.
You make it impossible for them to hide behind the bureaucracy.
The third strategy is cross-ethnic coalition building. And the document is very specific here. It says citizens must organize politically, not around a savior, a personality, or a tribal leader, but strictly around non-negotiable demands.
The author lists examples of these demands. Full, transparent land reform, public sector pay tied to inflation, totally independent funding for the judiciary, and the absolute criminalization of the public financing of political campaigns.
The paradigm shift is that you don't vote for a person, you vote for a demand.
And we actually saw a powerful real-world glimpse of this recently, which brings the author to the fourth strategy, the generational replacement strategy.
The document highlights the massive Gen Z protests that shook the government in 2023.
I remember the images from those protests. They were unlike anything we've seen in recent political cycles. Why does the author view those specific protests as proof of concept for the master plan?
Because they perfectly embodied the first three strategies. The 2023 protests were absolutely terrifying to the political establishment, precisely because they did not follow the old rules.
They were not organized by veteran politicians, and they were not bound by the old ethnic loyalties that have been so carefully cultivated since the post-colonial era.
You had youth from every single ethnic background marching together. And what were they marching for? Not to put a specific opposition leader into power, but around shared cross-ethnic economic demands, specifically the rejection of predatory taxation through the finance bill.
They prove that collective action beyond the ballot can force an entrenched system to panic and retreat.
Exactly. The source calls this a deeply rooted Kenyan tradition, drawing a straight historical line from the unyielding resolve of the Mao fighters in the 1950s to the courageous pro-democracy activists in the early 1990s, straight through to the Gen Z protesters today.
It is empirical proof that when Kenyans organize and act as a unified, demand-driven mass rather than manageable ethnic voting blocs, the extraction system simply cannot absorb the pressure.
It is genuinely inspiring to see that roadmap laid out with such clarity and historical backing. But the document doesn't stop at the physical borders of the country.
It expands this call to action globally in Section 6, delivering a very direct, urgent message to the massive Kenyan diaspora.
And I found this section particularly compelling because it shifts the perspective entirely.
This is a vital, often overlooked piece of the political puzzle. The document addresses the diaspora with deep empathy, acknowledging the pain of displacement. But it also presents a rigorous, unflinching economic challenge.
It acknowledges that many people left for London, Texas, or Toronto because the extractive system made staying and thriving at home impossible.
But it fundamentally reframes the massive financial contributions, the remittances that the diaspora sends back home every month.
The numbers are staggering. The document points out that the diaspora sends home more money every year than the Kenyan government receives from most major foreign aid programs or international exports. It is billions of dollars.
But here is the profound emotional weight the document drops on the reader. It refers to those remittances as an invisible subsidy that actually prevents a broken system from fully collapsing.
The author says, when you are in the diaspora, working a grueling double shift as a nurse in a UK hospital, or driving a long-haul truck in the US, and you send money home to pay for your niece's high school fees or your father's emergency surgery, you are actually doing the Kenyan government's job for them.
That is the tragic paradox the author highlights. This generosity is born out of deep familial love and absolute necessity. You cannot let your father die because the public hospital lacks medicine.
But what is fascinating and deeply troubling from a systemic perspective is that this private generosity inadvertently lets the political class off the hook.
How exactly does it let them off the hook?
By stepping in to privately fund the basic healthcare, education, and housing that a functioning state is supposed to provide through taxes, the diaspora absorbs the shock of the state's deliberate failure.
The political elite can continue to confidently loot the national health and education budgets because they know structurally that the diaspora will step in to ensure their families don't literally starve or die in the streets.
The remittances act as a pressure release valve for a system that should otherwise explode from citizen anger.
You left the country because the corrupt system made staying impossible, and now that exact same corrupt system relies entirely on your guilt and your love for your family to stay afloat.
That is a heavy, heavy realization for anyone listening who sends money home. But again, keeping with the tone of the document, the author pivots from this painful diagnosis to empowerment.
The text doesn't say stop helping your sick parents. It says the diaspora possesses tremendous untapped political leverage.
The author describes what they call structural leverage. The diaspora exists outside the immediate physical reach of the state security apparatus.
They possess foreign passports or permanent residency, which offers a degree of legal protection. They have international professional networks, and they have access to global financial and human rights institutions.
The document advocates for this strategic, organized redirection of even a fraction of those massive remittance flows into the political fight back home.
What does that redirection look like in practice?
Instead of just sending money to treat the symptoms of state failure, the diaspora must fund the cure. The author suggests setting up trusts to fund the grassroots economic solidarity networks we discussed.
It means paying the legal retainers for top-tier lawyers taking on the state in land rights cases for the rural poor. It means financing the laptops, servers, and security for the radical accountability journalists exposing the shell companies.
The source argues that for decades, the diaspora has spent its emotional energy being nostalgic for a romanticized version of Kenya that the system never actually allowed to exist.
And the author states clearly that nostalgia must be replaced with organized fury.
The grievance of a highly educated Kenyan forced to sweep floors or build a life abroad is not a personal failure. It is a structural grievance caused by elite theft.
And structural grievances require structural, organized responses. Applying international pressure on foreign governments doing business with corrupt officials, funding the civic movements on the ground, the diaspora can become the untouchable financial engine of the overthrow without ever having to stand at a tear-gassed protest in downtown Nairobi.
It is a complete paradigm shift. The author is asking the diaspora to evolve from being passive, exhausted supporters of their family's day-to-day survival to becoming active, strategic investors in their nation's total liberation.
They possess the capital to fund the organizational infrastructure that the Gen Z protests proved is so desperately necessary to sustain long-term political pressure.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the lie we were sold at independence, let's synthesize the core realizations this incredibly powerful source document has brought to light for our listener.
First and foremost, the system you are struggling against was built before you were even born.
Colonialism didn't truly end in 1963. The records suggest it essentially outsourced itself to a highly compliant local management class. Every structure concentrating power and wealth in Kenya today was either built directly by the colonial administration or built in its exact image to protect the elite.
Second, the author makes it clear that elections alone within this specific framework are not the cure. 60 years of enthusiastically lining up to vote haven't moved the national poverty needle because the ballot box, as currently designed, does not disrupt the fundamental alliance between state power and private wealth accumulation.
Third, and perhaps most importantly for the listener's sense of self-worth, the people suffering, the tea farmer in Kericho, the striking teacher, the exhausted doctor, are not the problem. They are not failing. The system is failing them by explicit design.
And finally, unity is not just a nice sentimental idea for a campaign poster. The document proves that cross-ethnic unity is a devastatingly effective strategic weapon.
Kenya is not a poor country. It is a stolen one. The knowledge of what is wrong isn't missing. Every single Kenyan who has ever been forced to pay a bribe for a basic service or waited in a broken hospital corridor knows exactly what is wrong. What is missing is the organization, the collective, unwavering will to act together.
And before we leave you with one final thought, I want to remind you of the action you can take right now, today, to be part of the solution.
Visit www.wantumnotum.com and create your account. Get free ebooks and enjoy KWM Podcast 24/7. Help change Kenya. You got the power. Together we can create the change we all have wanted for the last 60 years. Kenya belongs to all of us, not just to the looting elites.
And let's make sure we keep this vital conversation going. Let's connect on Facebook for more discussions. The link is https://kenyan.facebook.com/Kenyan
As we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to mull over as you go about your day. We've spent this time dissecting how the political class relies entirely on your participation in their manufactured ethnic divisions to maintain their vast wealth and their grip on power.
So what happens to their power tomorrow if you simply choose to recognize your neighbor as your economic equal today?
That is the realization that changes absolutely everything. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take this knowledge, share it with your community, argue with it, test it, and most importantly, add your own voice to the movement. The story of a new, genuinely independent Kenya is waiting for you to help write it.